Mary stood beside her husband's grave on that cold October morning, her heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. The rain fell steadily from the grey sky, mixing with the tears on her face as she held the small hands of her two boys, 8-year-old. James pressed close to her side, trying to be brave like his father had taught him. Little William, only 6 years old, buried his face in his mother's black dress, trying not to cry but failing as the tears came anyway. The funeral service was over now. The vicar had spoken kind words about Robert, calling him a good man who loved his family deeply. The neighbors had offered their sympathy and drifted away one by one, leaving Mary alone with her boys at the graveside. She looked down at the simple wooden cross that marked where her beloved husband now lay, and wondered how she would ever manage without him. Robert had been the kindest man Mary had ever known. He worked hard at the local mill, coming home each evening with flour dust on his clothes and a smile for his wife and children. He would swing little William up in his arms and ruffle James's hair, then sit by the fire telling stories until bedtime. His sudden illness had shocked them all. One day he was fine, laughing at breakfast, and 3 days later he was gone, taken by a fever that the doctor could not cure. The hospital bills had eaten up all their savings like hungry wolves. Mary had sold everything she could: her wedding ring, Robert's pocket watch, even the good china that had belonged to her mother. But it was not enough. Now she faced the world alone with her two precious boys and only £15 left in her purse. Their little rented cottage would have to be given up at the end of the month. The landlord had been patient, but he had his own bills to pay. Mary walked slowly back to the cottage with James and William beside her, each step feeling heavier than the last. She had no family of her own. Her parents had died when she was young, and she had no brothers or sisters. Robert's family lived far away in London, and she had met them only once. At her wedding 10 years ago, they had not seemed impressed with their brother's choice of a simple country girl as his bride. For 3 long days, Mary sat at her kitchen table, staring at unpaid bills and wondering what to do. She had applied for work at every shop and house in the village, but no one needed help, or at least no one needed help from a woman with 2 small children to care for. The boys sensed their mother's worry and tried to be good, playing quietly in their room and not asking for the treats they used to enjoy. Hope came knocking on the 4th day, when Robert's brother Edward arrived in his fine black motor car. Mary heard the engine putting up the lane and looked out to see a well-dressed man and woman stepping carefully around the puddles in their expensive shoes. Edward was older than Robert had been, with grey hair and a stern face. His wife Catherine was thin and sharp-looking, with a fur coat and a hat that probably cost more than Mary spent on food in a month. Mary smoothed her simple black dress and opened the door to greet them. She had hoped that perhaps Robert's family had come to offer comfort in their time of grief, or maybe even some small help with money for food and rent. Edward removed his hat and stepped into the small sitting room, his eyes taking in the worn furniture and faded curtains. Catherine followed behind him, her nose wrinkled as if she smelled something unpleasant. She perched on the edge of Mary's best chair like a bird ready to fly away at any moment. "We've discussed your situation," Edward said without any warmth in his voice. His words were cold and businesslike, as if he were discussing the weather rather than his brother's widow and children. "We're willing to take the boys. They'll have proper schooling and opportunities in London. Good food, warm clothes, a chance to make something of themselves." Mary felt her heart skip a beat. For a moment, relief flooded through her. Perhaps there was hope after all. But then Edward continued speaking, and her hope turned to ice. "But you, Mary, would need to find your own way. Perhaps as a servant somewhere, Catherine knows of several households that might take you on, though of course you need to improve your manners and learn proper household management. Mary's heart nearly stopped beating. She stared at Edward in disbelief. Sure, she had misunderstood his words. You want me to give up my children? It's what's best for them, Catherine added with a sharp voice that cut like a knife. Look round you. Mary, you can barely feed them now. What kind of future can you offer to growing boys? Edward and I have no children of our own. We can give James and William everything they need. Education, connections, a proper start in life. Mary looked at her boys, who had crept to the doorway to listen. James had his arm round little William's shoulders, both of them staring with frightened eyes at these stern strangers who wanted to take them away from their mother. She thought of Robert's gentle soul and knew without any doubt that he would never have abandoned a family member in need, no matter how poor or desperate they might be. The answer rose from deep in Mary's heart, strong and clear despite her fear. No, she said firmly, standing up straighter. We stay together. We're a family. Edward's face turned hard as stone. Then you're on your own. Don't come begging to us when you're sleeping in the streets, as their motor car disappeared down the muddy lane. Mary pulled her boys close and held them tight. They had each other, and somehow that would have to be enough. For 3 cold nights, Mary and her boys slept in an old barn outside the village. The barn belonged to Farmer Wilson, who had told them they could stay for a few days, but no longer. The hay was scratchy and smelled of old animals, but it was better than sleeping under the open sky. Mary made beds for James and William using her own coat and Robert's old jacket, trying to keep them as warm as possible. She spent their last few pounds on bread and milk from the village shop. Watching her children's faces grow thin with hunger, the shopkeeper, Mrs. Henderson, looked at them with pity, but also with worry. Mary knew that people were talking about the widow and her boys who had nowhere to go. Some felt sorry for them, but others whispered that they were becoming a burden on the village. James tried to be brave like his father had taught him. He helped his mother carry water from the stream and never complained about sleeping on the hard ground, but Mary could see the fear in his 8-year-old eyes when he thought she was not looking. Little William was not as good at hiding his feelings. He cried softly when he thought his mother could not hear, and asked every morning when they could go home. Mary's heart broke a little more each time she had to tell him that they had no home to go to. The nights were the hardest. Mary would lie awake listening to her boys breathe in the darkness, wondering what would happen to them. She had knocked on every door in the village looking for work, but no one needed help, or at least no one needed help from a woman with 2 children to feed. The few coins left in her purse would buy food for maybe 2 more days. Then what? She tried to pray like Robert had taught her, but the words seemed to disappear into the cold air above the barn. On the 4th morning, Mary woke to find frost covering the old blanket she had pulled over the boys. Winter was coming early this year, and she knew they could not survive many more nights in the barn. She was trying to coax a small fire to life with damp sticks when she heard footsteps outside. A tall man in warm clothes appeared in the doorway of the barn. Mary quickly stepped in front of her boys, not sure if this stranger meant them harm. The man was older than Robert had been, maybe 40 or so, with brown hair turning grey at the edges. His clothes were patched but clean, and his boots were muddy from walking through the fields. The man looked round the barn, taking in the makeshift beds and the small pile of belongings that was all Mary had left in the world. His weathered face showed kindness in his blue eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle. "This is no place for a family," he said, shaking his head sadly. "Name's Tom Mitchell. I work as a ranch hand on Mr. Peterson's farm just over the hill. Been watching the smoke from your fire for days now. Wondering who was staying out here. Mary lifted her chin, trying to keep her dignity even though she knew how desperate they must look. We're not causing any trouble. Farmer Wilson said we could stay for a few days. Tom nodded slowly. I'm sure you're not causing trouble, ma'am. But winter's coming, and this old barn won't keep you warm much longer. I've got a small cottage on the land where I work. It's not much, but it's warm and dry, has 2 bedrooms and a proper fireplace. Mary felt her heart leap with hope. But then reality crashed back down on her. We have no money to pay rent, she said quietly, ashamed to admit their poverty to this kind stranger. Tom looked down at James and William, who were peeking out from behind their mother's skirt. He knelt down slowly until he was at their eye level, his movements careful and gentle like Robert's had been when he talked to children. Well now, Tom said with a small smile, I could use some help round the farm. James here looks strong. Enough to help with the animals. You could learn to milk the cows and feed the pigs. And William, you could gather eggs from the chickens. They're friendly birds. Not scary at all. What do you say? The boys looked up at their mother with hopeful eyes that had not sparkled like that since before. Their father died. Mary saw something in Tom's face that reminded her strongly of Robert, a gentle strength and genuine care for others that seemed to come from deep in his heart. Why would you help strangers? Mary asked, still not quite believing that this man would offer them shelter without asking for anything in return. Tom stood up slowly, his knees creaking a little from years of hard work. He looked up through the barn door toward the hills, where his farm lay, and Mary could see sadness pass across his face like a shadow. Lost my own wife 2 years back, he said quietly. Sarah was her name. Fever took her, same as what took your husband, I expect. Been lonely ever since, rattling round in that cottage by myself. Sometimes we all need a helping hand when life knocks us down, and sometimes helping others helps heal our own hearts too. Mary felt tears prick at her eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude rather than despair. Here was a man who understood loss and loneliness, offering them not just shelter, but dignity through honest work. That evening, Mary tucked her boys into real beds for the first time in weeks. The cottage was small but spotlessly clean, with cheerful yellow curtains at the windows and a fire crackling in the stone fireplace. Through the small window, she could see Tom sitting on his porch, playing a gentle tune on an old harmonica that seemed to carry all his hopes and sorrows on the evening breeze. For the first time since Robert's death, Mary allowed herself to hope that they might not only survive this terrible time, but perhaps even find happiness again. Spring came to the little farm like a blessing from heaven itself. After the long, cold winter months, Mary watched with wonder as green shoots pushed up through the dark earth behind Tom's cottage. The air grew warmer each day, and birds returned to sing in the apple tree that grew beside the kitchen window. It felt like the whole world was coming back to life, and Mary's heart began to heal along with it. Mary discovered she had a gift for growing vegetables that surprised everyone, including herself. She had never had a proper garden when Robert was alive. Their little rented cottage had only a tiny yard with poor soil. But here on Tom's farm, the earth was rich and dark. She planted seeds that Tom had saved from the year before. And soon rows of green beans, carrots, potatoes, and onions began to flourish under her careful hands. Every morning, Mary would walk out to check her garden, pulling weeds and watering the plants with buckets of water from the well. The vegetables grew strong and healthy, and her small garden began to feed them all. Tom was amazed at how well everything grew under Mary's care. and he told her she had the greenest thumbs he had ever seen. James learned to milk Bessie the cow and became Tom's shadow round the farm, the 8-year-old. Boy followed the older man everywhere, eager to learn everything about caring for animals and fixing things that broke. Tom taught him how to hold the milking bucket steady and how to gentle Bessie when she was nervous. James learned to muck out the stalls and spread fresh hay for the animals to sleep on. Little William made friends with every animal on the place, but especially with an old brown and white dog named Patch. Patch had been Tom's companion for 7 years, and he was getting grey round his muzzle. But he still had energy to play with a 6-year-old boy. William would throw sticks for Patch to fetch, and the dog would sleep curled up beside William's bed at night, keeping watch over the child like a faithful guard. Tom was patient and kind with both boys, never raising his voice even when they made mistakes that cost time or money. When James accidentally let the chickens out of their pen, and they scattered all over the farm, Tom just smiled and helped him round them up again. When William forgot to latch the gate and two pigs wandered into Mary's vegetable garden, Tom gently showed him how to fix the damage and remember better next time. In the evenings, Tom would take the boys down to the stream that ran through the farm property and teach them to fish with poles he had made from willow branches. They would sit quietly on the bank, watching their lines in the water and talking about their day. Sometimes they caught fish for a supper, and sometimes they just enjoyed the peaceful time together. At night, they would gather round the fireplace, while Tom told them stories about his own childhood on a farm much like this one. Mary found herself laughing again as she watched her children's joy return day by day. James grew taller and stronger from the farm work, and his face lost the worried look it had carried since his father's death. William's giggles filled the cottage as he played with Patch and helped collect eggs from the gentle hens. Both boys were learning skills that would serve them well in life, and more importantly, they were learning that they were safe and loved. The work was hard, but they all pulled together like pieces of a puzzle that fit perfectly. Mary mended clothes in the evenings by lamplight, darning socks and patching holes in work shirts. She cooked hearty meals from simple ingredients, fresh vegetables from her garden, milk from Bessie, eggs from the chickens, and sometimes fish that the boys had caught in the stream. Every meal was a feast because it was shared with people who cared about each other. Tom fixed the leaky roof that had dripped rain into buckets all winter long. He taught James to use tools properly and safely, showing him how to hammer nails straight and saw boards without cutting himself. Even little William helped by collecting eggs every morning and feeding the chickens their grain, counting them to make sure none had wandered off. One evening in late spring, as they sat round their simple wooden table sharing a meal of fresh bread and vegetable soup, Mary realized something wonderful had happened without her even noticing it. They had become a family again, not through blood or marriage, but through choice and care, and the daily acts of love that bind people together. Edward and Catherine drove past the farm one day in their fine black motor car, the same one they had arrived in months ago to take the boys away. Catherine pointed through the car window at Mary hanging laundry on the line while James and William played with Patch in the sunny yard. "Look how far she's fallen," Catherine said with scorn in her voice, living like a peasant, doing manual labor. Those boys could have had everything, and instead they're growing up like common farm children. But Mary, with warm sun on her face and genuine laughter in her heart as she watched her boys play, knew the truth that Catherine could never understand. She hadn't fallen at all. For the first time since Robert's death, she had found where she truly belonged. Her children were healthy and happy, learning to work with their hands and care for living things. They were growing up with values that money could not buy. That night, as Tom played his harmonica under the stars while they all sat on the porch enjoying the warm evening air, Mary realized that love comes in many forms. Sometimes it's not the family you're born into, but the family you choose to build together with open hearts and willing hands. Summer brought the worst drought anyone in the county could remember. Day after day, the sun blazed down from a cloudless sky like a giant furnace, baking the earth until it cracked open in long, jagged lines. The grass turned brown and brittle, crunching under their feet when they walked across the yard. The stream that had bubbled merrily through the farm all spring began to shrink to a thin trickle, then disappeared altogether. Mary watched with growing worry as her beautiful vegetable garden began to wither despite her desperate efforts to save it. She carried bucket after bucket of precious water from the well, but it was not enough. The bean plants drooped their leaves sadly, and the potato plants turned yellow and died. Even the apple tree beside the kitchen window began to lose its leaves too early, as if it were already preparing for winter. The farm animals grew thin and listless in the terrible heat. Bessie the cow gave less milk each day, and the chickens stopped laying eggs regularly. Tom worked from dawn until dark, trying to save what he could of the crops and keep the animals alive. He dug a deeper well, hoping to find more water, but struck only dry earth and rock. His face grew gaunt with worry, and Mary could see him calculating numbers in his head, trying to figure out how they would survive. Bills began to pile up on the kitchen table like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The feed store wanted payment for the grain Tom had bought to keep the animals fed. The doctor who had treated William for a fever in June sent a bill that made Mary's heart sink. Even the simple things they needed, soap, lamp oil, flour for bread, cost money they did not have. Mary made a decision that she told no one about. Early each morning, before the others woke up, she would walk the 3 miles into the village to wash clothes for other families. Mrs. Henderson at the general store had mentioned that several of the wealthier families needed someone to do their laundry now that their regular washerwoman had moved away. The work was hard and the pay was small, but every penny helped. Her hands grew raw and cracked from the harsh soup and the constant scrubbing, but Mary never complained. She would stand over the steaming washtubs for hours, scrubbing out grass stains and food spots, her back aching and her fingers bleeding from the rough fabric. Then she would hang the clothes to dry and walk the long miles home, arriving just in time to cook supper as if she had been there all day. The boys helped however they could. Sensing the worry that hung over the farm like the heat itself, James worked like a man, though he was still just a child of 9 years old. He took over all the milking duties and spent hours searching for any bit of green grass that Bessie could eat. Little William collected every egg the hens managed to lay, and helped his mother in the kitchen, standing on a wooden stool to reach the stove. Then one blazing hot afternoon in late July, a fine black motor car came up the dusty lane to the farm. Mary's heart sank when she recognized the man who stepped out. Mr. Harrison, the bank manager from town. He was Catherine's brother, with the same cold eyes and then cruel mouth. He wore an expensive suit despite the heat and carried a leather folder full of papers. Tom met him at the door, his hat in his hands and worry written all over his withered face. Harrison did not waste time with pleasantries. He spread the papers on the kitchen table and pointed to numbers that made Tom's shoulders slump with defeat. "The mortgage payments are 3 months behind," Harrison said in a voice like ice. "The bank cannot wait any longer. The farm will be taken away unless the full debt is paid by the end of the week." Mary stepped forward, her chin raised despite the fear in her heart. "How much do we owe?" Harrison named a sum that might as well have been £1,000,000 for all the chance they had of raising it. But then his thin lips curved in what might have been a smile if there had been any warmth in it. "However, I do have an offer that might solve everyone's problems," he said, looking directly at Mary. "Leave this place and these people. Stop embarrassing our family with this arrangement. A widow living unmarried with a man, it's unseemly. Do that, and I'll give Tom more time to pay his debts." The words hit Mary like a physical blow, but her answer came swift and strong, rising from the deepest part of her heart where her love for this makeshift family lived. "This man showed us love when our own relatives showed us nothing," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "When Edward and Catherine would have separated me from my children, Tom gave us a home. When we had nowhere to turn, he opened his door. We stand with him. No matter what happens." James stepped forward then, his young voice steady and short as bite, the trembling in his hands. "I'll quit school and work full-time to help earn money. I'm strong enough to do a man's work." Little William, who had been listening from the doorway, suddenly ran to his room and returned with his precious collection of coins that he had been saving in a tin box under his bed. Pennies and halfpennies that Tom had given him for doing chores, a few shillings he had found over the months, his entire treasure. "Here, Tom," he said, pressing the box into the man's hands. "Take all of it. We're family." Tom looked at this family who had chosen him just as he had chosen them, and his eyes filled with tears that had nothing to do with the financial troubles they faced. He pulled them all close in a fierce embrace and spoke with a voice thick with emotion. "We're in this together," he said. "Whatever comes, we face it as a family." Harrison left without another word, his cruel offer rejected. That night, as they held each other close in the small cottage, they knew that love like theirs could weather any storm. Word spread through the village about the family's troubles like ripples on a pond. Mrs. Davies from the bakery was the first to act. She appeared at their door the very next morning with warm loaves of bread wrapped in clean cloth, and a basket of fresh butter and jam. Her round, kind face was serious as she spoke to Mary. "No family should face hard times alone," she said firmly. "My grandmother always said that troubles shared are troubles halved. You've been good neighbors to all of us, and now it's our turn to help you." Mr. Peterson, who owned the largest farm in the area, came by that afternoon. He was a big man with calloused hands and a heart just as large. He offered Tom work on his land during the harvest season, promising fair wages that would help them catch up on their debts. Other neighbors followed his example. The blacksmith said Tom could help in his shop during the slow farming months. The miller offered to let James work after school, carrying bags of flour for customers. Even the vicar, a gentleman named Father Williams, organized the whole village to help save the farm. He stood up in church on Sunday morning and spoke about the importance of community and caring for one another in times of need. The collection plate that day was fuller than it had been in months, and every penny went toward helping Tom pay his mortgage. The rains finally came in early August, gentle and steady, falling like a blessing from heaven itself. Mary stood in the doorway of the cottage, watching the precious water soak into the cracked earth of her garden. The air smelled fresh and clean, and she could almost feel the land coming back to life round them. Within days, tiny green shoots began to push up through the soil. The stream that had disappeared completely began to flow again, first as a trickle, then as a proper bubbling brook. The crops that had survived the drought grew green and strong, again with the life-giving water. Tom's face lost its worried look as he saw the vegetables responding to the rain. Even Bessie the cow seemed happier, giving more milk now that there was fresh grass for her to eat. The chickens began laying eggs regularly again, and hope returned to their little farm like the sun coming out after a storm. Tom worked harder than ever. Determined to make the most of this second chance, he repaired fences that had been neglected. During the worst of the drought, he planted a second crop of vegetables that would mature before the first frost. With the help of the neighbors and the steady income from his extra jobs, the farm began to prosper in ways it never had before on a golden autumn evening in September. As the leaves on the apple tree began to turn red and yellow, Mary watched Tom teach William to whittle on the front porch. The 6-year-old boy sat beside the man who had become his father in all but name, carefully carving a piece of soft pine wood with a small knife. James was helping with the evening chores, leading Bessie in from the pasture and making sure the chickens were safe in their coop for the night. Mary felt a deep peace settle in her heart as she watched her family. Their simple life, built on love and hard work, was richer than any mansion could ever be. She had everything she truly needed: people who loved her, children who were healthy and happy, and a home filled with warmth and laughter. Tom approached her as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. His weathered hands were gentle as he took hers, and Mary could see something important in his blue eyes. "Mary," he said quietly, his voice soft with emotion. "We've been a family in all but name for so long now. We've faced the worst together and come through it stronger. Would you marry me? Make it official before God and the whole village." Mary's heart filled with joy so pure and bright that she thought it might burst. She had known this moment would come someday, had hoped for it in the quiet moments when she watched Tom with her boys or felt his steady presence beside her. "I think we've been married in our hearts for quite some time now, Tom," she said, her voice thick with happy tears. "Yes, I'll marry you. Nothing would make me happier." Their wedding was simple and beautiful, held in the meadow behind the cottage on a crisp October morning. Mary wore her best dress, mended and pressed, with wild flowers in her hair that William had picked for her. The whole village came to celebrate with them. Mrs. Davies brought a wedding cake she had baked herself, and Mr. Peterson played his fiddle for dancing. James and William stood proud as Tom's best men, wearing their church clothes and faces shining with happiness. They had helped Tom pick wild flowers for Mary's bouquet, and had practiced walking down the makeshift aisle between the wooden chairs that neighbors had brought from their own homes. Edward and Catherine drove past during the celebration in their fine motor car, but they didn't stop. Through the car window, Catherine could see Mary laughing as she danced with her new husband while the boys played with the other village children. But they couldn't understand that the greatest wealth isn't measured in money or fine clothes, but in the love we share with others and the joy we find in simple moments. As the story ends, Mary holds Tom's calloused hand while watching their boys, truly their boys now, chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. The insects blinked like tiny stars in the warm evening air, and the children's laughter rang out across the peaceful farm. Mary whispers a prayer of gratitude for the poverty that led them to riches of the heart, and for learning that sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as our worst troubles. Sometimes the family we need isn't the one we're born into, but the one we choose to build with open hearts and willing hands. Love doesn't come from blood or money, but from the courage to care for each other through life's storms, in that small cottage, surrounded by the people who chose to love them. Mary finally understood that home isn't a place, it's wherever your heart finds peace. The end.